Uh, Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark McCaffrey. I'm a co-focal point for ECOS, the United Nations Climate Change Education, Communication, and Outreach Community. And I'll say just a brief overview of what ECOS is in the second here. But welcome to this very special event, which is the first time we've done a large international call. We have these ECOS community calls every Wednesday, normally at a time that's not convenient for Asia and the Pacific. We don't normally do it at 5 p.m. here in Central Europe, where I'm located, which is convenient for the Americas, but not so convenient for Australia and much of Asia. So this is a special time, and we hope to do more of these community calls at different times of day to make it more convenient for people outside of Europe and Americas. But in any event, very briefly, ECOS was formed about 4 years ago as a community to support the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. As a part of the Framework Convention, which was signed and then ratified in the early 1990s, there was a plan to have every nation develop their own education programs, training programs, engagement programs, so that the public and the citizens of those countries, every country in the world essentially, would be informed and be able to participate in developing adequate responses to climate change. And by and large, that hasn't happened. You know, with a few exceptions here and there, we can point to some success stories, but by and large, countries have not followed through on their commitment to inform and engage their publics. So ECOS was formed several years ago and is recognized by the United Nations Secretariat. And we are a volunteer organization with folks all over the world, partners all over the world. And we're very pleased today to highlight some of the partners in Australia and Southeast Asia. But we have these regular Wednesday calls, and there's other ways you can participate. I will put into the chat window the ECOS webpage, where you can dive in and find more information about how you can join, how you can get involved. For those of you who are students, we do have some fellowship opportunities, some internships, and you can talk to me or be in touch with Shane or others, or Susie, to find out more about those opportunities. But I think without further ado, I'd like to just turn it over to Shane French, who is helping to organize this special event today. And we'll have time, hopefully at the end, for some question and answers to all the different ideas and exciting programs that we'll be hearing about today. So Shane, it's all yours. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mark. Really appreciate it. And yeah, ECOS, Susie introduced me to the ECOS community, and it's really inspiring work that they do, and it's really valuable to get involved with. And as Mark was saying, there is a keenness from ECOS to stretch out into the Asia Pacific region, because it has at the moment been Europe and mostly US kind of centric, I guess. So yeah, please check out those opportunities if you can. And thank you so much, Mark, for asking us along, and Susie as well. So we're having a broad presentation today. I've done some slides and some notes because I tend to waffle if I don't talk to slides and notes. But I'll be talking about my experience over the last couple of decades with community interface around sustainability and climate education, and I guess the journey that I've been on, and the lessons I've learned in my messaging and climate literacy through discussions with the community. Susie will be talking around an academic level around the interface between public and academia, and some of the examples that what Monash is actually doing out on the ground as well, Susie, and you'll be able to pick out more of that. And we'll also be getting some fantastic examples of what's happening over in Malaysia from Chern and Holly, who I can see there. Hi, Holly. So I'm going to kick it off. I might turn my camera off because I'm living in a semi-regional area that has really dodgy internet, and it tends to work better without camera. But please let me know if you can see the PowerPoints. I'm just going to talk to some slides. chuck any questions in the chat, and we'll try and gather some of those, and we'll see if we can get to all of them later on. I think Mark's doing that as well. Cool. All good?
Fantastic.
All right. Let me know. Can people see? What can you see? Hopefully not my OneNote.
We can see you a few years ago, Shane.
Good. Very, very good. Okay. Now, I just need to do one other thing. I'm very sorry, everybody.
You're perfect. Excellent teacher.
Well, yeah, this actually is a photo of me a few years ago. Firstly, before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional custodians of the land that I'm broadcasting from this evening. And I pay my deepest respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And that also, my elder, my mother, she's kind of the pivot point, and she turned me into who I am now. And I started my environmental education journey not really as an educator, but more as a provocateur, as an activist. And Greenpeace was my holy grail at the time. But my mum was a fierce environmental campaigner in her local community where I grew up in Central Victoria. And it really fired that kind of passion in me about environmental activism. So when I moved to Melbourne, I got really, really excited about instantly getting involved in the activist community. And Greenpeace was where I thought I would spend most of my life. So for most of my 20s, I basically believed that if you didn't care about the environment, then you needed a good telling off and you were basically the enemy. And that was really fun for a few years, and I had lots of passion and energy, but I started to realize that I was burning out, and that's not very good for someone who's 25 to feel like they're burning out and they feel like they're getting nowhere. So I started to realize that the path that I was on around activism and that passion, I couldn't maintain it, and it wasn't personally sustainable. So as I kind of became a bit more tired and cynical and dejected, I stumbled across this place called Ceres. And it was a complete accident. A friend at Greenpeace at the time said, you should check out this environment park that's up in East Brunswick. I had no idea it was even there. So I got to work with a really amazing, diverse crew of people. You can see some of them here. And these are educators from all varieties of backgrounds, from all walks of life, from all over the world. Some were experts in the field of environmentalism, some were not, some were just passionate about it. And Ceres was a place that they could foster that passion, and they could actually deliver and work with people in the community about their passions. So I was very privileged to be there for a very, very long time. So Ceres is built on top of a landfill site. So before it was landfill, it was an asphalt mixing area. And before that, it was a pig farm. And before that, it was obviously bushland. So it's been through quite a journey. What really captured me about Ceres was its story. So it was the story of community giving rebirth, basically, to what was an industrial wasteland. Now, the park gets over 300,000 visitors a year, and about 60,000 school students come through a year. So it's completely different to what it used to see in these pictures. And I love that story of hope, and given the chance that nature can rebuild and renew itself, and the power of community to come together and make that happen. So it was so refreshing to have these positive emotions. It was so recharging to be at the forefront of that positivity, as opposed to where I always felt like I was up against it and I was bashing my head against a brick wall. And that was a personal journey. So you can see here, this is Ceres' first renewable energy display. That's a fantastic jacket there right at the front, and a fabulous haircut. That's not me, I don't know who that is, but that was a renewable energy display from the early 1980s. And you can also see the community gardening happening over there on the right. So the land is slowly being reborn. Now, I want you to look at this photo really carefully and just picture this as looking west into a suburb called Brunswick. And Susie has seen this quote from me a million times, but I'll say it again, it's my favorite. I love, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that has been something that has carried me through for the last couple of decades. This is what that exact same spot looks like now. So from an industrial landfill to this, you can't get a much more powerful story than that rebirth of land and that hope and that positivity that comes from community action. So looking at public interface and teaching, my early approaches, my early days of teaching were still that shock and awe. We're all going to die. Things are terrible. We used to have these really big posters of the year 2030 projecting ice caps melting and really devastating pictures. And I feel really guilty about it now, but I used to get people to go and stand next to the images that were most disturbing to them and the ones that upset them the most. And one day, this girl who was in, I think, grade 3 started to cry. And I felt really terrible, and because the polar ice caps had melted, and I started rethinking about the way I was approaching my education. I used to hold up pieces of coal and say, this is killing us and we've got to get off coal and coal's evil and coal's evil. And I didn't quite reconcile the messages that I was giving that, well, I've powered most of my life with coal and fossil fuels, and so does most of the place where I live. So I needed to re-message what I was doing. Selling fear to people wasn't working. And I discovered in that context, in that community kind of outreach context, that basically can shut people down. People say, I don't understand it. This stuff is scary. I don't want to know. And they'll step back. And so me stepping back and relating these larger concepts and ideas was a really big wake-up call for me. So something we started focusing on at Ceres, and I know in other community parks around Melbourne as well, and education providers, is really focusing on empathy first, empathy and connection. So building empathy for the environment became a real focus of Ceres while I was teaching there. And so the outreach and pedagogy that we had was around, we're so isolated from the natural world in an urban environment that it's really hard to act on something and to protect something that you don't really feel you have a connection with, or that it's something you do as a recreational thing. You don't have that deeper connection. So a lot of studies show that in Victoria and Melbourne at least, the vast majority of Victorians and Melburnians do actually care deeply about the environment, but there is a lack of connection to the environment. So empathy and connection started to come first. And it started showing me that there were other ways that you could get really incredibly deep learnings out of nothing. So literally this is a whole. And this is actually one of my favorite educational learning experiences I've ever experienced in my life. And it's such a powerful lesson that what we do every single day, as small as it might seem, can make a huge difference. And this hole, while it was there, was one of the most powerful learning tools I've ever used. So Ceres was landfill, as I said. You can see that they've dug down. This was for a biogas digester, which is being installed now. You can see all of the landfill in there. And so before they filled in the hole, I jumped into it and started pulling out some of the plastic packaging that I could see. I just wanted to see, had it broken down, what did it look like? Was any of it starting to degrade? And the piece that I found that most intrigued me was this one. So this is a dish mop wrapper from a supermarket chain called Woolworths. Now this Woolworths logo, I did a little bit of research, and this was about 1.5 meters down into the hole. I did a bit of research, and this Woolworths logo was used from 1976 to 1987 in Victoria. So Ceres stopped being a landfill site in 1978. So sometime between 1976 and 1978, someone bought a dish mop somewhere in the community. They unwrapped it, they went and hopefully mopped their house and were very proud, and they had a clean house, and that was wonderful. And they threw the dish mop wrapper out and they moved on with their life. I was born in 76, so that was 40 something years ago. So although this piece of plastic looks quite dirty, it's actually the structural integrity of it. It was completely, it hardly had changed. I couldn't rip it with my hands. You couldn't pull bits off it. It was not degrading. You could literally rewrap something up with it. So I couldn't think of a better example or a more powerful lesson and a simple everyday reflection that resonates really deeply. And I found this such a powerful learning for the community when I was speaking to people and kids and adults alike. The lessons around this, that someone made a simple decision to mop their floor and left this mark on the environment for that amount of time and going on for another 100, 200, 300, 400 years. So suddenly things like biodegradability, plastic pollution, microplastics, all of these things come to life out of this relating an everyday experience to this. So that led to other ideas around actually going out and making somewhat complex ideas really simple. So difficult and frightening things like global environmental issues like global warming and microplastics in the ocean, we need to be able to make these, I guess, understandable and translate them into actions for people, because not everyone is as passionate or as able to act as other people in the community. So that became a really big focus of what we did at the park and what I continue to do as an educator. So not everyone can have solar panels as an example, but in Victoria, they can buy green power from their local energy provider. So there's always empowerment of the community that can happen. And one thing I also found over the last few decades is that climate literacy is very different, not just in Melbourne, but all over the place, all over regional Victoria. People have a different understanding of what climate change is, what their part they play in it is, how bad it is, everything, why it's caused. The best example I can think of is where our lack of climate literacy fell over was the failure of the carbon tax between 2010 and 2013 to really take root in the community and really settle in Australia, because it was so easy for the opposition forces to sow doubt and fear and misinformation into the community that the tide turned on it, and it was basically done through misunderstanding. And partly that was our fault for not communicating climate change and the carbon price correctly, but it also was a great indicator that our messaging wasn't working. So we need to reimagine the way we're actually communicating with the community. And so you see this top photo to the left here, this fellow right on the edge here. I had a fantastic conversation with him. This is up in regional Victoria. Having conversations as opposed to trying to deliver information, I have found to be a really powerful tool. So regional Victoria have these fantastic, amazing insights and diverse opinions about sustainability and climate change, coming from the farming community and coming from people you might not necessarily think have those attitudes. They're at the forefront of climate change. They're seeing the droughts and the floods and the fires, they're feeling it, and they have these incredible insights that I don't necessarily get in the city. So getting out of my comfort zone and going out into different areas and having a dialogue has been really, really powerful. Reputable and publicly available information is also really, really important when working in the community sector. Not everyone has access to literature that is available through university websites or university libraries and databases. So talking to people and being able to give them information where they can follow up on that information and it's readily available and easily understood is vital. And this is currently my favorite. Many of you would have heard of Paul Hawken's Drawdown. This has been one of my favorite pieces of literature, probably over the last 10 years. So the idea of Drawdown is that it breaks the 100 most applicable carbon reduction solutions around the world. Whoop, no, I've gone forward. And it puts them into, each chapter is really this like bite-sized, fantastic, digestible piece of what's being done around the world, what you can do around the world. And I love number 3. Number 3 here is reducing food waste. So from an educational point of view and a community action point of view, almost every single person, certainly in Melbourne, can help to reduce food waste. And it is, if we all did it, incredibly powerful as a climate change action. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have the answers here. And that's what I love about Drawdown. We're lucky in Melbourne to have a strong network of community organisations and not-for-profit providers and friends of groups and councils that people can get involved with that are doing amazing work in the broader community around sustainability and climate. And I think ultimately what we're all really aiming for beyond all of this, and this is the favourite cartoon that I've ever seen, is creating a better world. And this, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? It's creating a better world. And that's the little piece that I take out of this. Even for people I've had conversations with that do doubt climate change is real, the conversation is still around, but what's the harm in creating a cleaner, safer, better world? And and it's been quite a journey. So that's a little bit of an insight of what's happened for me over the last 20 years in community education. Now I'm going to, I think Susie is there. So my plan is to kick over to Susie.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Shane. I hope everyone enjoyed that. What I love about... Oh, sorry. Yeah. Amazing work, Shane. That was such a nice insight. And Siri's such an amazing group and community there. What I love about today's panel is we're going to go through all kinds of different scales and different insights. And so I'm up next, and I'm going to talk more on initiatives at sort of the higher education institutional level, which is a little bit of a different take on things than Shane, and then we'll have Sue, Chern and Holly also talking about programs in Malaysia on a different sort of scale. So hopefully there's going to be something in there for everyone. So I am going to share my screen now, and hopefully that will work. And all right. Can people see my screen okay? Yes, fantastic. All right. So for my 5 minutes, I'm going to dip into more of a big scale kind of view on how higher education can actually step outside the traditional and start to empower change, agents of change through modelling best practice, through being solutions focused, and through essentially starting to work more in that nexus between university business, which is research, and broader society. And the reason for this is I believe that higher education has the capacity and arguably the responsibility to be leaders in addressing these complex societal issues like climate change. So research and education, that's part of what we do and certainly an important part, but we can also be serving as a model to society and actually actively demonstrating how to put our research into action on the ground and providing opportunities for students to actually get involved in that as leaders. And I think that's equally important. So there's a large body of research that's starting to suggest that a lot of academic work and the literature we produce may actually stay in that so-called ivory tower of academia. So what I want to do today is just highlight a few major initiatives from Monash, which some members of our audience may already be familiar with and may even have insights on. And these initiatives are really different to the traditional research model. They're sitting in that nexus between academia and society, and they are impact and solutions focused. Now, the examples I'm about to go through are not directly my work for the most part. Rather, I've chosen some outward focused, really innovative projects at Monash to showcase today that are aligned really strongly with SDG 17, which is partnerships for the goals. And it's all about making partnerships between higher education and society, because I believe that's so empowering for young leaders in higher education and beyond to be part of. So the first initiative I'm going to talk about up on screen is Net Zero. So as I mentioned, research and education are crucial, but equally, universities need to be serving as a model to society. One way we can do that is to provide proof of concept or a roadmap about how we put research into action, and that is very empowering for young leaders, but also other people in the community to see. So Net Zero actually won the 2018 Momentum for Change Lighthouse Award offered by the United Nations. It is we were the first Australian university to set an energy reduction target in 2015 and commit to net zero emissions by 2030. Now, as we actually implement this, what we're actually doing in addition to reducing our emissions on campus is that we're providing an exemplar or proof of concept to society on how small cities, for example, can implement their own transition, and we're getting them involved in that process. Right, just to give you a feel of what this project involves, I'm just going to run through some of the technical stuff in a very brief way, noting that this net zero project does have technical components. So it does have, your solar panels and your battery storage, but equally it's about education, outreach, partnerships between regional communities and industry, and student leadership, and that is all part of the experience. So this implementation has involved electrification, for example, So that includes charging stations, energy efficiency, lighting. It includes on-site and off-site renewables at quite a large scale. And it involves net zero ready buildings that are Passive House or Green Building Council of Australia standard. And of course, it includes a microgrid on our main campus, which connects 20 huge buildings. And this provides an interconnected electricity network that's going to maximise the utilisation of and distribute energy in a harmonised way. And that sort of grid's really important for renewable energy in sort of regional cities. And the Net Zero team are actually working with a whole lot of stakeholders to show them, to explain, to tell them their stories about how this is achieved. But in essence, let's put aside the technical details for a moment. What this project really is, particularly for young change agents, is it's a way to make our university a living laboratory where students from across the university can immerse themselves in what is a socio-cultural transition, a change in thinking and an implementation process. And that's a very empowering way for us as a university to be involved in sustainability. But of course, there are many other ways that we're being innovative in the climate education outreach space. And here I'm going to touch on educational approaches. And in particular, here I'm going to talk about an editorial that was written by Gillian Bowser from Colorado State, Sarah Green from Michigan Tech, myself and Pamela Templer from Boston University. And in our editorial, we're making basically the case for or advocating for solutions-focused education. So we find that students are very aware that, you know, they need that disciplinary depth in their area of choice, whether it's sustainability or policy or engineering, but they're demanding something more. And I think most of the people in the room can resonate with this. They're demanding a solutions-based education that is interdisciplinary so that you can grapple with the complexity of socio-ecological issues like climate change, and that has a strong transformative skills curriculum that gives you that extra layer that you may need for your work as a change agent, including skills in leadership, cross-cultural communication, innovation, resilience, and advocacy. And essentially, we want to involve students with real stakeholders, be it in government or industry, so that they can be part of practicing those skills. And up on screen, some of the authors of those editorial are there with me, and some people in this room as well. And we have a group of students from across a range of universities around the world coming together, working on real issues and presenting at the UN Climate Change Conference. Within a course I work on, and I know some of you in the room are from this course, the Masters of Environment and Sustainability. You know, this kind of approach of transformative learning is at the heart of what we do. So we're trying to move away from that traditional sort of blinkered approach to something that is co-developed across all the areas of sustainability at the university. And you can see down the bottom of the model where we've mapped the course curriculum to all 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And authentic practice in interdisciplinary teams with society, with community, with industry, with government, where you can practice that leadership skill set is really at the heart of the course and can be quite transformative for students. So I think, you know, through my journey, something that I will always advocate for is solutions-based interdisciplinary education that really supports young leaders to create partnerships across sectors, disciplines, and is going to set them up with the skills and confidence they need to address today's socio-environmental challenges, which are complex ones and multidimensional ones. So I've got just a couple more examples of really sort of nexus-based initiatives that this institution has within it. And Jing might be able to speak to this one a little bit later when we open up to Q&A. But one of my favourite examples is the Monash Climate Change Communications Hub. And that is really sitting in this nexus between research and society. And it is actually an initiative that brings together a whole lot of social scientists, media experts, and also climate scientists. It's a specialist communication team that aims to reach the general population at scale. So young leaders both within our organisation, but in the general public and people of all ages, and to engage them in the climate dialogue. So in Australia, sometimes the dialogue around climate change is not necessarily a matter of fact, but similar to the US, it can be associated with identity politics. And Climate Change Hub actually has a range of methodologies to approach this. So one of which is their evidence-based non-persuasive communication. It's all about letting the facts speak for themselves. And it's all about understanding the trusted sources for the general population, including young leaders. So I know, and Jing can speak to this in a moment, I know that they did a whole lot of amazing research in support of Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which stipulates the importance of climate change education and accessibility of climate science. They did some really great research that showed that the general public actually trust people like weather presenters as a source of climate science, rather than necessarily academics or politicians or other people. And therefore, they started to engage with a whole range of major public media outlets, TV outlets, to basically get climate science and climate data into the nightly news and really scale up this communication and empowerment of the general population. So they're using communications research and science and getting it out there into a broader audience. Look, there's so many initiatives I could talk about, but I'm just going to finish on this next one, which is Climate Works, which again, I know people in this room can speak to more. But I just think this is another wonderful initiative in the higher education landscape. So Climate Works, in short, is a philanthropic funded group. And it is in this, exactly in this nexus space that I'm talking about between research and impact. So it's an independent, research-based, not-for-profit organisation whose aim is to achieve net zero. And they're a team of non-academics within the university whose purpose is to draw in the research from the climate scientists, from the business strategists, from all our different areas of expertise, and feed that into a range of other teams in private, public and non-profit sectors through partnering with leadership and through building a reputation and sense of trust as a credible and fact-based broker of research. So they're reaching organisations where they need to be reached, and they've done some amazing international work in Southeast Asia and the Pacific to develop low emissions development strategies, amongst many other things. So they're just a few examples of how higher education can start to lead and model best practice and bring research into action and get students involved in that space in a really empowering way. There are many more examples I could speak to, but I hope that's given you an idea of how higher education is changing. I think these nexus spaces are the future. I think interdisciplinary solutions-based education is the future, and I will always continue to advocate for those areas. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. It's a different angle. Thanks, everyone. And now, I'll just put my video back on. So I really like this panel. We've got so many different angles happening. And we're going to go through with some more angles. And this time from our Malaysian team, the fabulous Holly and Sue Chern. And I'm not sure who wants to go first up.
Yeah, if Holly doesn't mind, I'll go ahead. All right. Okay, let me just share my screen. Thank you, Susie, for the wonderful talk. I feel that, you know, Malaysia, we still have a long way to go. And, you know, learning from all these wonderful examples will be good for us to incorporate those findings. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so thank you for this opportunity, everyone. I'll hope that you see my screen right now. I'll use this 5 minutes of fame to really share some of the learnings that I got as the unit coordinator for a first year unit, and also identified some opportunities as well as next steps that we could take. So using this first year unit, which is actually the full name is Introduction to Environmental Sustainability, we currently have 2 major assessments and split into the individual assessment and also the group assessment. And in the individual assessment, mainly students build their knowledge in the sustainability space through critical evaluation of literature and also building their skills in academic writing and reading. So from here, there's not much experiential learning in the context, but it is then addressed in the group assignment, where students, they take the they are given a task to identify sustainability practices at a publicly shared space. So for example, a student accommodation, local hiking trails, or even local shopping malls. And from there, look at ways to further improve the current practices, be it in terms of energy efficiency or water footprint, for example. And what's interesting for this particular group assignment is that the students, they come up with short videos, and mainly because nowadays in this digital age, you know, students and also young generations, they have shorter attention span. Making videos helps to convey clearly the message. Right. So what is not really working for this group assessment is that there's still some lack of opportunities for you know, lifelong action and also practice, especially after the unit completes. So what I would think that we could bring forward, what basically the education, the awareness that was obtained from the unit, is to practice it and also promote more education, sustainability education elements in disciplinary units. So for example, in chemistry, biochem, or even in spanning across units like business units and marketing. And with that, more action programs such as, you know, involvement in student clubs would be also good to provide opportunities for you know, current students to practice sustainability. Okay, okay, so I'm sharing one local example. This is a education initiative that is done in University Malaysia, a local university where, like what Susie mentioned earlier, it's also a living lab. So there's currently 49 living labs in University Malaysia, where in this talk I'll focus on one of it. It's called Water Warriors. So what I would like to really draw your attention here is that it started as a grassroots movement. So they wanted to convert a dead lake, which was high in biological oxygen demand, into a recreational lake. And one important element that I would like to also highlight is that it took 7 years in order to do that. So from here we can see that, you know, in order to bring sustainability and also allow more practices, it takes quite a long time. So I've summarized it into one table here. As mentioned, projects like these, like the living laboratories, takes a long duration. So in order to see these outcomes and also gain stakeholder trust, as well as promote governmental funding. So what can be done is to actually you know, open up opportunities for these community to the community as well, and also allow the then student, which is by now be an alumni, to be still involved in these projects. And these would be some in a way an empowerment opportunity. So what I've talked earlier, since the first slide, is basically talking about how education builds awareness. But one gap that was identified was to bring this awareness into action. So some of empowerment opportunities like what Susie have shared, it's really good having because it comes the support, funding support, and also technical support comes from a large group of people. And so it would be, I think it would be good on the local level in Malaysia. We can obtain this sort of support too. The best practices and learnings from these good examples in Australia would be also available and accessible, and then we can do a feasibility check to see how it applies at the local level here in Malaysia. Okay, so finally, the last part is actually a lifelong practice. So a gap that was identified is that as we bring knowledge into awareness, into action, practice needs to be also injected so that we create global citizens. So also to look beyond specific job roles that is related to sustainability, instead reframe the mindset of sustainability to basically having sustainability elements and values as you bring as a value addition by the younger generation of work and into the conventional job roles. Just an idea. So before I end, I'd like to close with 3 take-home messages. Here in Malaysia, the sustainability education scene is progressing in universities, but not at a rate that is fast enough compared to Australia, for example. And secondly, there are more concerted efforts that are needed between educators, citizens, and also policymakers. And the gaps, all these gaps between these 3 components can be then closed through continuous improvement in existing knowledge, tools, as well as funding. Right, thank you very much.
Great point, Sue Chern. That was so interesting. Yeah. I liked your point about it being a long build, which really resonates with me as well. Yeah, fantastic. It's great to see lots of nice comments in the chat as well, which we're monitoring. I can't wait to open this up to open discussion. I think we have one more speaker, Holly. We were going to have Taryn as well from Hepburn Wind, but she's in a regional location and her power has gone out, so we're in a slight pickle. But we're lucky to have Holly to finalise the panellists today. Thanks, Holly.
Okay, thank you, Susie, and thanks everyone for sticking with the session. I'll try not to take too long. Okay, I'm going to do what Shane did and just share a few slides, if that's all right, because that's similar to Shane. I need something to keep me on track. So yeah, I wanted to introduce myself. My name's Holly Barclay. You may be able to tell from my accent, I'm not Malaysian, I'm not Australian. So what am I doing here? I'm originally from the UK, where I did a PhD on freshwater ecology. So my background is in freshwater ecosystems, and that's why the photo is in that slide. I originally came to Malaysia in 2011 to study stream ecosystems in the rainforest and compare the biodiversity with streams in oil palm. So that was when I first came to Malaysia. I really loved the experience, and that was sort of started looking around for jobs, and that's how I ended up as a lecturer in the School of Science at Monash University Malaysia campus. So what I wanted to talk about today is some examples of some of the climate change teaching that I use in my classes here in Malaysia. I teach mainly sort of scientific subjects, but I do like to bring in some management and sustainability content as well. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. And sort of coming from the UK to Malaysia, what are some of my kind of personal reflections on what I think are some of the barriers to maybe increasing climate change teaching in higher education, but also more generally in Malaysia. So, okay, this is just some statistics on sort of climate change awareness and climate change concern in Malaysia. Sort of just to give a bit of context. So coming from the UK, where majority of people say that they know something or know a great deal about climate change. Climate change awareness is a little bit lower in Malaysia, not as low as Indonesia, which I've put in the list there as well. I should just say these results are from 2007, 2008. So I think this is probably a little bit out of date, and obviously we've had Greta Thunberg now, so maybe more people know about climate change. And in Malaysia, around 50% of people, 50% of adults view global warming or climate change as a serious personal threat. So not completely terrible and not kind of completely amazing as well. So there's definitely work to do in Malaysia on climate change education. So what do I teach about climate change? So I teach a first year subject on environmental science. We learn about the carbon cycle, classic but important. We talk about climate change, and we sort of go into a little bit of detail on coral reefs. I use a video that was actually created in Australia, but I think it's nice. What I try to do is incorporate examples that I think will be relevant to students in Malaysia. That's one of my challenges in Malaysia, is finding kind of interesting case studies, examples, actions that people can take on a Malaysia scale that aren't sort of energy transition or kind of insulation of homes. Sometimes a lot of the examples feel like they're not very relevant to people here. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And then on the right hand side, some of you may have come across this before. This is something I'm planning to implement this year, because we're all stuck inside on our computers, is a website, an online simulator looking at if we change various aspects of climate change policy, introduce a carbon tax, increase energy efficiency, what impact will that have on global climate change projections? So the kind of aim of the task is to work as a group and to get below 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees warming by changing these different policy options. So trying to look at solutions together. This is a global climate model. So looking at what would we need to do as a global community to address climate change through different options. And what's quite nice about this simulator is a bit interactive, it's a bit hands-on, and also it gets people thinking about solutions, how solutions to climate change are quite complex. And a lot of people, maybe sometimes the immediate thought is, okay, we need to reduce deforestation, or we need to plant lots of trees, all of which are good things. When you look at this model, when you use this model, what students tend to observe is that it makes a bit of a difference to global warming, but it doesn't get us down to 1.5 degrees warming. So we need a lot of actions put together. So it's just quite a nice interactive activity that we can do together. And luckily for me, something we can do online as well. I also teach a third year subject on environmental management. So that unit, neither of these units are just about climate change. They're generally about environmental science, but I do incorporate aspects of climate change. So we talk about UNFCCCs, we talk about international agreements and sort of what roles those play in addressing environmental issues. Talk about policy options on climate change mitigation. So sort of taking that carbon cycle, quite simplistic view of climate change from first year and sort of thinking about solutions. This year I had a guest speaker from the Monash Net Zero initiative. So that was really exciting to be able to hear about what Monash Australia is doing to reduce emissions. I like to include some outside examples. Again, there's not many businesses in Malaysia that are being very ambitious about trying to achieve net zero emissions, for example. So I do like to incorporate some examples where possible to be a bit ambitious, not to make people feel like there's nothing they can do about climate change, but I do think that kind of changing your light bulbs, recycling some plastic bottles is a bit weak, and we need to be setting sort of, or showing students what is possible when a business or a company or a university campus really sets their sights on an ambitious climate change target. Oh yeah, and then finally for that unit we have an assignment, which is a written assignment where I get students to write a report thinking about climate change risks and opportunities from a business perspective. So they each pick a company and they sort of tell me about what are the risks to that company as a result of climate change, what is that company doing about those risks, and then I get them to make some recommendations on what the company should be doing to kind of increase their climate change mitigation or adaptation sort of management strategies. So you'll notice those are just some examples of some of the companies that students have chosen for their assignments. When I originally imagined this assignment, I was hoping we would do more kind of local companies, but I think in terms of finding information about what companies are doing, obviously to write an assignment you need some information. The big international companies, as a result of this kind of international climate change reporting and targets, tend to be easier to find information for. So that's just the way that assignment has ended up. I still have some ambitions maybe to localize it more to Southeast Asian examples, but I think it is quite challenging to find that kind of information. So we don't do that at the moment. So just what I wanted to sort of finish on, just some concluding thoughts on challenges of teaching about climate change in Malaysia, and this is very much open to discussion and hearing thoughts from other people. I've already mentioned I think there are relatively few case studies or examples of local climate change impacts and or climate change solutions in Malaysia, and things like teaching activities, often I have to find examples from other countries and kind of adapt them for the Malaysian context. It'd be lovely to be able to just download a worksheet that is relevant to our context. Yeah, sort of save time and save effort in developing some of these teaching activities. Job opportunities in the environmental sector are, I've said they're relatively limited in Malaysia. I mean, they're certainly perceived as being relatively limited. However, I do think when you look at other countries, you look at these big international companies, a lot of them are setting climate change targets and are taking steps to address climate change. So I think this is a growing sector, and there is sometimes a bit of an old-fashioned view that if you do a degree that specialises in environmental science, you may find it hard to find jobs, or you may only be able to get employed with an NGO. NGO salaries in Malaysia are terrible. So it's kind of you end up with the passionate students, and it can be harder to reach out to the students who have a little bit of interest in sustainability but don't want to dedicate their whole life to kind of low income jobs. So it's a bit of a challenge. Interdisciplinary teaching, so Susie's mentioned that, you know, really effective climate change teaching needs to be interdisciplinary. My background is ecology. I'd love to have more involvement from social sciences, from engineering, media studies, but it's quite difficult in Malay. It's just not such a popular option. People want to know exactly what the unit will be about, the learning objectives, and they get a bit confused when you sort of take it in lots of different directions sometimes. So it's just a bit of a new concept in Malaysia, is this interdisciplinary degrees or interdisciplinary teaching units. I've said climate change risk maybe slightly less for Malaysia versus other parts of Southeast Asia. So that's what that orange and yellow map is all about on the right hand side. Apologies because I've shrunk it down so that you can't actually see any of the words, but just to say I think Malaysia is kind of yellow, and then obviously those countries with the red or the dark orange have been assessed as having a higher risk. This is based on physical risk and also adaptive capacity. Malaysia is a kind of upper middle income country, so of course there will be impacts of climate change, but I sometimes wonder if in terms of international donors and in terms of just government urgency, maybe climate change is seeing as being slightly less risk than some of these other countries. What I do always say to my students is, what about migration? Where are these people in Cambodia and Bangladesh who are going to get flooded going to go? One of the main countries they're going to come to is Malaysia. So there's all kinds of impacts that I think maybe aren't regarded or aren't acknowledged in Malaysia that will happen here. And then just finally, another challenge is the higher profile, I think, or higher perceived profile of other sustainability issues in Malaysia. So I think over 70% of Malaysians live in cities now. And so things like air pollution, in terms of visible air pollution, things like the photo at the bottom, just trash in rivers, often just receives more media attention, and I think is really in the face of the public, whereas climate change kind of just doesn't get it doesn't get as much visibility, and so obviously, and again, because there are so many environmental challenges, I think sometimes people choose to focus on the more immediate concerns that voters and members of the public are really kind of raising with their politicians or with their communities. But what I just wanted to finish on is that photo at the bottom right. So this is a group called Climate Action Malaysia, or CAMI. So having said that, there's relatively low awareness and relatively low climate change sort of action or concern in Malaysia, I think this is an issue that is going up, certainly in terms of importance for politicians and importance for younger people, including Monash students. And so the photo is of a kind of, we're not allowed in Malaysia to call it a protest, a gathering of people in 2019 who were sort of raising concerns about climate change. And this climate action group are really, I think, quite inspiring. Unfortunately, because of COVID-19, they've kind of scaled back some of their activities. But there are people who are very concerned about climate change, a lot of people who are trying to take action, and there is some signs of a more coordinated approach. So I think this is a really good time, this 2020 COVID-19 increased awareness of climate change, to start thinking about how can we increase the skills and the knowledge of our students, but also how can we reach out to other members of the public in Malaysia as well to help them take action in this area. Okay, so thank you. That's all for me. So just some thoughts, and open to questions and open to discussion on any of these points as well.
Fantastic. What wonderful context there. Thank you so much, Holly.
Welcome.
Yeah, I'm not sure, you know, there's so many ways we could open this up to discussion, but I might be cheeky and just pick on Jing and Ian, who I can see in the room, for their perspectives, because Jing's done quite a lot of work in the climate communication space, and I think might, you know, have a lot of insights to share. And Ian's been doing some great work in Singapore and might have some views on the Malaysian-Singapore context to share as well. And Jing, is there anything you'd like to share with us on your experiences in climate outreach and education?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Susie, for throwing me to the deep end. I appreciate that. I can briefly introduce myself. So I freshly graduated from MES, Master of Environment Sustainability, at the end of last year, and then before that I was able to intern with Monash Climate Change Communication Research Hub. I'll call them the Hub. For about 3 to 4 months. And then the Hub is literally about, you know, like building, so they have this primary vision to build a climate literacy in Australia. And then they research into ways of communicating climate change, transform the climate science information into simple, clear, and factual messages in repeated form by trusted sources. So as you might already know, that there are 5 American or 6 Americans, and then much like the UN, much like how the US has been divided, Australia is also very divided of how we perceive climate change. You know, like the alarm group, the concern group, the cautious group, the uncertain group, and then the doubtful and disengagement. So by talking about communication, we either need to design 6 distinct communication messages to target each of them, or they can be addressed as a whole with what the Hub is doing, non-persuasive communication that Susie have just mentioned, which pretty much is to avoid advocacy, wants to have high impact, delivering factual information, which is easy to process on a regular basis to a large audiences. So most importantly, we need to have those messages delivered by trusted sources. So by talking about trusted sources, just for Melbourne, scientists has ranked the most trusted voices from the community that they want to hear climate information from. So it's farmers and firefighters, those people who are at the front line of the climate risk, and then so on and so forth will be like leaders of environment groups, school teachers, even heat strikers and young girls. So actually very different way of communicating the climate information to. So the key, I'm mindful of the time, so I guess there will be some key recommendations which you know, when using mainstream media to deliver climate info, a place where we have very little control over who is receiving the messages, what the research is finding that is preferable to deliver the message and the information in a simplified, localized nature. and ensure it is delivered again by these trusted sources. And also, very importantly, because this is about my work in Australian Conservation Foundation as a story strategy coach, generating stories and narratives with emotional content can be really useful strategies when communicating climate change. So I can talk about this for ages, but I'm mindful of the time. So pass on to you, Ian.
Thanks,
Hi everyone, name's Ian. Wasn't expecting this, but I'm from Singapore, and I'm recently been working with a social enterprise in Singapore on currently tackling cigarette butt litter, with surprisingly a tobacco company. And I just think that the general attitude towards sustainability and climate change is slowly shifting. Before I took up the master's, which I graduated at the same time with Jing, in Singapore, I couldn't find, or rather I didn't surround myself with the people who are into sustainability. So I just took a leap of faith, came to Melbourne, learned about sustainability. And around this time, Singapore was also is increasingly getting more into sustainability as a I wouldn't say a trend, but they're definitely taking it more seriously. The government's taking it more seriously. The Prime Minister has mentioned it in his National Day rally, and I just think that this is a real turning point. And taking up the masters was a great opportunity for me to also apply what I've learned with the social enterprise. And with regard to the Singapore-Malaysia context, Malaysia, they are not allowed to call it a protest. In Singapore, we kind of have to apply for a permit to have any form of gathering with a specific purpose. So in that area, it's kind of the same. It's very top down. At the same time, we also don't believe that we should wait for the governments to move, because it can be really slow. It can be really glacial to see to wait for the government to move on. So currently, being able to apply what I've learned in this social enterprise, which has the potential to kind of hopefully go viral. I just think this is a great time to be alive. To work with sustainability in the midst of a pandemic is really exciting, and I think moving forward, taking sustainability education to another level would be something I'm very excited to see. Yeah, so that's all from me. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian and Jing. Now, Mark and Miroslav, I can see that, I know we've gone a bit over time. I'm not sure what your usual practice is, where you cut it off, or whether you've got any comments from us, for us over here in Malaysia and Australia, or anything that resonated with you, or any questions you've got.
Miro, would you like to share any feedback or thoughts?
Yeah, first I would like to express my delight that you are so active as members of ECOS community now in Australia, Malaysia, Singapore. It's really inspiring, and that's also what the world needs. That's my main message is, please continue this important work and continue engaging in the ECOS community, because this sharing of best practice or good practice cases and lessons learned is very valuable. Although today there are not so many other ECOS members from North America or so, or also Latin America, but they will still have a chance to watch the video and then see what you are doing. What I also is a personal interest, where I would also be interested to connect further, is your links with Climate Works Australia, the philanthropic arm, and how to really get financial resources mobilized for climate change education, communication, and outreach, that's a systemic challenge that we need to master, so that the members of our community will not all die of starvation or burn out or whatever. So we have to also have mechanisms for resource mobilization. I can share with you something that we have developed at our organization. It's crypto stamps for resource mobilization for youth climate action, and also the plan for an individual climate action dashboard. And if there are in your networks people who have expertise in the field of digital innovation to connect it with the climate education, communication and outreach, then I would be very happy to connect on these topics as well. But in general, I'm delighted to hear that this is growing, and also in coming days, I think in 2 days, there will be a briefing from the ECOS community in Africa. And so it's really very inspiring, and congratulations and thanks for your work.
Thank you, Miro. And Miro, I know you've been running some amazing events via UN. Could you tell us a bit about those? Because I think some of this group would be interested in future events.
Okay, so now with the COVID crisis, things are totally changing, and it's really the modus operandi of the United Nations is changing also. So one thing for getting engaged with the UN is the New York Secretariat, and there is the accreditation through the Economic and Social Council, which opens the doors to very many conferences and really on-site participation, and registering side events or having exhibits. We've had this year high-level side event to the UN high-level political forum on sustainable development, sharing also the link there to the announcement. I would suggest that also your university also could have a look on how the accreditation process is for UN ECOSOC accreditation. And because although very much is now virtual, but when they have their calls for proposals for side events or so, they very often still limit it to those organizations that have this accreditation. And the other element is the UNFCCC process, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where again there is this accreditation process for observer organizations. And once this status is approved, it's the possibility to have side events and to have also exhibits at these big UN conferences. But this is now also going to change, and my organization is also somehow having conversations with the COP26 presidency, the Conference of the Parties of the next big UN conference on climate change, where they want to make it more inclusive and really using digital innovation for getting the wider public, or they are even calling it all of society conference of the parties in Glasgow. So there's a lot going on, and there are many people who say the UN is slow, it's bureaucratic, it is inefficient, what I would also agree to, but it's still the best that we have as a global community. This organization has the mandate, and so we are really working with them, trying to give ideas and inspire also institutional innovation where possible. We've had an event called Envisioning a People's COP on the 8th of June in the context of the there's a campaign called Race to Zero, and I would very much suggest that you have a look on it and try also to align your work with it, because that's somehow now the framework from the official process where they try to get mobilize the different non-state actors for climate action, also universities and cities. And our organization is working with some partners from the digital innovation community on how to create engagement opportunities for young people and especially for individuals, because for the time being in the UN system there is not really an entry point for an individual. Perhaps for civil society organizations and for businesses also, but for the individual there are no ways to communicate what an individual is doing or get it recognized and certified and registered, and this kind of things, gaps we are trying to fill, and I hope to work also with ECOS communities in this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Miro. And everyone, if you look up ECOS on Facebook, you'll see updates from Miro and Mark and various other people. And we'll also invite you into our Facebook community so you can see our updates, if that helps as well. Great. I'm not sure, Shane or Mark, if you want to sum up or close off.
Well,
today.
I would like to just thank you all very much, Susie, Shane, everybody else who's participated today. It's been fascinating to learn more about all the good efforts that you have. And just as another sort of reminder, ECOS is a community. We sometimes describe ourselves as a network of networks. And yes, we're working at a global scale, but also, as Miro was just alluding to, we aim to help connect individuals and communities, nations, all the way up to the global scale. We actually have a framework that has been helpful, I think, for many of us, called the Powers of 10 framework. And I've...
Oh, you're muted now, Mark. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. So anyhow, I put a link to some essays about the Powers of 10 framework and other information about the work of ECOS into the chat window, so you can learn more if you're interested. And I mentioned this idea of an internship or fellowship for one or more of the students that you are working with. And one of our goals is basically to, as a network of networks, we need to start identifying in a more methodical, systematic way all the different work that people are doing at different scales. There's a lot going on individually and at a household scale that will be ultimately hard to know about, but at an organizational scale, at a scale of an organization like Ceres that Shane was talking about, or some of the other projects that you're mentioning, we need to start being more methodical about how we can sort of map them out, literally map them out, and identify who they are, what are they working on, what is the scale and scope of their project, and then put that all into a shared database that we can all make use of, so that we can be better at connecting each other up to projects in different parts of the world that are similar and overlapping. So that's certainly one of the goals of ECOS, is to serve as this sort of backbone organization that can help in this sharing of information and amplifying the good work that's already being done at so many different scales of society here. So I think, again, thank you all very much for joining us today. And we will continue with our weekly ECOS calls